Picture a sun-soaked island paradise, the Jolly Roger Hotel gleaming against the cliffs, where glamour hides dark secrets. Arlena Stewart, a dazzling actress, is found strangled on a pristine beach, her death staged to deceive. Hercule, with his razor-sharp mind, unravels a web of jealousy, betrayal, and love. A perfect alibi, a fake sunbather, a manipulated tide who orchestrated this deadly charade. In just 30 seconds, dive into evil under the sun, where every smile conceals a motive, and Poirot's little gray cells reveal the shocking truth. Chapter 1. Arrival at the Jolly Roger. The sun blazed over the Devon coast, casting a golden sheen across the waves that lapped against the rocky shores of Smuggler's Island. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the salt air, stepped from the small motorboat onto the wooden jetty of the Jolly Roger Hotel. His straw hat, tilted at a precise angle, shielded his sharp eyes as he surveyed the scene. The hotel, a whitewashed edifice perched on a cliff, seemed to bask in the August heat, its terraces dotted with colorful parasols and wicker chairs. Poirot adjusted his bow tie, a gesture as instinctive as breathing, and allowed himself a moment to inhale the mingled scents of seaweed, jasmine, and the faint tang of lemon from a nearby cocktail. He had come for repose, or so he told himself. The cases of recent months' murders, tangled with greed and passion, had left even his indefatigable mind craving a respite. Yet, as he climbed the stone steps to the hotel's entrance, his little gray cells stirred. Repose, for Hercule Poirot, was rarely untroubled. The manager, a wiry man with a nervous smile, greeted him effusively, ushering him into the cool, tiled lobby. "Monsieur Poirot, an honor. Your reputation precedes you. A quiet stay, I hope." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Quiet, oui," he murmured, "but one never knows what the sea may wash ashore." From the lobby, he stepped onto the main terrace, where the hotel's guests lounged in the midday sun. His gaze, methodical as a metronome, catalogued them. A young couple laughed over gin fizzes, their American accents bright and brassy. An elderly gentleman in a Panama hat dozed over a newspaper, his monocle dangling. A woman in a severe black dress scribbled in a notebook, her lips pursed as if the world displeased her. But it was another figure who drew Poirot's attention. As inevitably as a spotlight finds the star of the stage, Arlena Stewart reclined on a cushioned lounge chair by the pool, her auburn hair cascading like a flame against the white of her dress. Her laughter, rich and deliberate, floated across the terrace, drawing heads like moths to a lantern. She was beautiful, dangerously so, with eyes that sparkled like emeralds, and a smile that promised secrets. Beside her, a man in a linen suit sat stiffly, his face a study in restraint. Her husband, Poirot, presumed, noting the absence of a wedding ring on Arlena's hand, though a diamond glittered there instead. A teenage girl, all angles and sullenness, hovered nearby, her sketchbook clutched like a shield. The air around them crackled with unspoken tensions. Poirot settled at a small table, ordering a tisane from a waiter who moved with the languid grace of one accustomed to the heat. As he sipped, he observed. A young man, athletic and bronzed, approached Arlena, his smile too warm, his gaze too lingering. His wife, a pale woman with delicate features, watched from a distance, her hands twisting a handkerchief. An older man, red-faced and boisterous, clapped the young man on the shoulder, his voice carrying tales of colonial exploits. A stylish woman in a tailored suit passed by, her glance at Arlena's husband sharp with something unspoken history, perhaps, or longing. The scene was idyllic, yet Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unraveling human folly, sensed discord. Arlena Stewart was no mere actress. She was a catalyst, stirring desires and resentments in equal measure. He recalled the whispers in London salons, her affairs, her scandals, her ability to enchant and enrage. "She is like the sun," Poirot mused, "beautiful, but one cannot look too long without being burned." He finished his tisane, his eyes never leaving the tableau. The Jolly Roger, with its polished surfaces and glittering guests, was a stage set for drama. And Hercule Poirot, whether he wished it or not, was never merely a spectator. Chapter 2. The cast of characters. The morning sun climbed higher over Smuggler's Island, painting the Jolly Roger Hotel in hues of gold and amber. Hercule Poirot, seated at a shaded table on the terrace, sipped his café au lait with the precision of a man who considered even breakfast a matter of method. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, roamed over the guests scattered across the hotel grounds, each absorbed in their own rituals of leisure. The air was warm, carrying the murmur of waves and the clink of glasses. But beneath the surface of this idyllic scene, Poirot sensed the stirrings of discord. A holiday, he knew, was often a crucible for human passions, and the cast assembled here promised a drama as intricate as any he had encountered. Poirot's gaze first settled on Arlena Stuart, who lounged by the pool with the languid grace of a panther. Her silk robe, a vivid scarlet, clung to her curves, and her auburn hair caught the sunlight like a halo of fire. She was reading a novel or pretending to, her lips curved in a smile that seemed to invite the world's admiration. Yet Poirot noted, her eyes flicked upward now and then, scanning for an audience. She was a woman who thrived on being seen, and the Jolly Roger was her stage. Beside her, a silver cigarette case gleamed, engraved with initials that were not her own. A gift, perhaps, or a trophy. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with curiosity. Nearby, Kenneth Marshall, Arlena's husband, sat in a wicker chair, his posture as upright as a soldier's. He was a man of middle age, with a lean face and gray eyes that betrayed little emotion. His hands, resting on a newspaper, were steady, but Poirot observed a faint tightening of his jaw when Arlena laughed, a sound that carried across the terrace like a siren's call. Kenneth's suit, though impeccably tailored, was sober, almost dour, a stark contrast to his wife's flamboyance. He was, Poirot surmised, a man who valued control, yet was tethered to a woman who embodied chaos. What, Poirot wondered, did such a man feel when his wife drew every eye but his? Hovering at the edge of the pool was Linda Marshall, Kenneth's daughter from a previous marriage. At 16, she was all sharp angles and awkward intensity, her dark hair pulled back in a severe braid. She clutched a sketchbook, her pencil moving furiously, though her eyes darted toward Arlena with a hostility that was almost palpable. Plain cotton dress and scuffed sandals spoke of a teenager who rejected her stepmother's glamour. Poirot noted the way she flinched when Arlena called out to her, a casual darling, do join us. That carried more command than affection. The girl's resentment was a thread in the tapestry, one that could unravel into something dangerous across the terrace. Patrick Redfern sprawled in a deck chair, his athletic frame clad in a loose linen shirt and shorts. His dark hair was tousled, and his smile, as he leaned toward Arlena, was boyish, yet calculated. He was, Poirot thought, a man who knew his charm, and wielded it like a weapon. Patrick's attention to Arlena was blatant, his laughter too loud, his gestures too familiar. He tossed a beach ball into the pool, calling out to Arlena to join him, and she responded with a playful splash that drew admiring glances from other guests. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Such flirtations, he knew, rarely ended in mere amusement. Christine Redfern, Patrick's wife, sat under a parasol some distance away, her delicate features shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. She was small and pale, her blonde hair neatly pinned, her dress a modest blue that seemed to shrink from notice. Her hands folded in her lap held a book of poetry, but the pages remained unturned. Her eyes, however, were fixed on her husband, and Arlena and Poirot caught the flicker of pain in them, like a candle guttering in a storm. Christine's silence was eloquent. She was a woman watching her world fray at the edges. Poirot wondered what strength lay beneath that fragility, and what it might drive her to do. At a nearby table, Major Charles Barry, a retired officer with a florid complexion, held court with a glass of whiskey in hand. His voice boomed across the terrace, recounting a tale of tiger hunting in Bengal that grew more improbable with each telling. His eyes, bloodshot but shrewd, lingered on Arlena with a mix of admiration and resentment. Poirot overheard him mutter to a waiter about debts unpaid and that sort of woman. The mage's bluster, Poirot suspected, masked a grievance, perhaps one tied to money or pride. Men like Barry, he knew, could be dangerous when their egos were bruised. Emily Brewster, a spinster of indeterminate age, sat alone near the terrace railing, her black dress absorbing the sunlight like a void. Her face, angular and stern, was set in a perpetual frown, and her pen scratched furiously in a notebook, poetry perhaps, or a diary of grievances. She glanced at Arlena with a look that could curdle milk, her lips tightening as if she had tasted something bitter. Poirot recalled her sharp comment at dinner the previous night. That woman's a menace, flaunting herself like a Jezebel. Emily's disapproval was moral, but Poirot sensed a personal edge to it, a wound that went beyond mere propriety. The American couple, Odell and Cary Gardner, occupied a table near the bar, their voices a bright counterpoint to the British Reserve around them. Odell, a rotund man with a booming laugh, was expounding on the virtues of Broadway to anyone who would listen, while Cary, her hair a lacquered blonde helmet, nodded enthusiastically. Their eyes, however, strayed to Arlena, and Poirot caught their whispered exchange. "She's the one from that scandal with the producer, isn't she?" Cary's tone was gleeful, Odell's more cautious. They were spectators, Poirot thought. But spectators could become players when gossip turned to action. Rosamond Darnley, a dressmaker whose elegance rivaled Arlena's, stood apart, her tailored suit a study in understated sophistication. Her dark hair was swept into a chignon, and her eyes, a deep hazel, held a quiet intensity. She was speaking to Kenneth Marshall, her voice low, her manner familiar, yet restrained. Poirot noted the ease between them, a shared history that needed no words. Rosamond's glance at Arlena was cool, almost clinical, but when she turned back to Kenneth, her expression softened. A woman of ambition and poise, Poirot thought, but what did she seek here, and at what cost? As Poirot sipped his coffee, he catalogued these observations, his mind arranging the guests like pieces on a chessboard. Each had a role, a motive waiting to be uncovered. Arlena Stewart was the queen, commanding attention and stirring unrest. Kenneth, the stoic king, guarded his emotions, but not his wife. Linda the pawn harbored a grudge that could turn reckless. Patrick, the knight, played a dangerous game of charm, while Christine, the bishop, moved diagonally, her pain hidden, but potent. Major Barry, a rook, blustered forward with old grievances. And Emily Brewster, another pawn, cloaked her bitterness in righteousness. The Gardners, spectators for now, were wild cards, and Rosamond, perhaps a second queen, held secrets of her own. The terrace buzzed with the hum of conversation, but Poirot's ears caught snatches of meaning. A waiter mentioned Arlena's late-night walks along the cliffs, always alone. A chambermaid, clearing a table, whispered about a heated argument between Patrick and Christine in their room. The barman, polishing glasses, noted that Major Barry had been drinking heavily, muttering about debts of honor. Poirot filed each detail away, knowing that truth often hid in the mundane. He rose, smoothing his jacket, and strolled toward the cliff path that led to Gull Cove, a secluded beach below the hotel. The path was steep, winding through gorse and heather, and Poirot navigated it with care, his stick tapping the ground. At the cove, he found Arlena sunbathing, her scarlet robe discarded for a green swimsuit that seemed to merge with the sea. Patrick was there, tossing pebbles into the waves, his laughter echoing. Christine watched from the cliff above, a solitary figure against the sky. Poirot paused, his eyes narrowing. The scene was picturesque, yet it felt staged, as if each player knew their mark. Returning to the hotel, Poirot encountered Rosamond Darnley in the lounge, sketching a dress design on a notepad. "A beautiful place, is it not, mademoiselle?" he said, his voice genial. She looked up, her smile polite but guarded. "Beautiful, yes, but beauty can be deceptive, Monsieur Poirot." Her words lingered in the air, a warning or a confession. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. "Indeed, and it is the task of Hercule Poirot to see beyond the deception." As he returned to his table, the sun reached its zenith, casting no shadows. But Poirot knew that shadows would come, cast by jealousy, greed, or love. The Jolly Roger was a microcosm, its guests bound by invisible threads of desire and resentment. Arlena Stuart, with her magnetic allure, was the center of this web, and Poirot sensed that the strands were tightening. He finished his coffee, his mind alight with possibilities. The cast was assembled, the stage set. Now, he thought, it was only a matter of time before the curtain rose on tragedy. Chapter 3. A morning of tensions. The sun hung high over Smuggler's Island, its rays piercing the morning haze and bathing the Jolly Roger Hotel in a relentless glare. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in a cream linen suit, stood on the cliff path, overlooking Gull Cove, his cane planted firmly in the sandy soil. The sea below shimmered like a sheet of sapphire, but Poirot's attention was fixed on the human currents swirling among the guests. The air was thick with the scent of gorse and salt, yet beneath the idyllic surface, he sensed a gathering storm. His little gray cells, ever vigilant, were already piecing together the fragments of discord he had observed since his arrival. Below, on the crescent of golden sand, Arlena Stuart reclined on a striped towel, her green swimsuit a vivid slash against the beach. She was the picture of languid beauty, one arm draped behind her head, a cigarette smoldering between her fingers. Her laughter, bright and provocative, carried up the cliff, drawing the gaze of every passer-by. Poirot noted the calculated tilt of her head, the way her eyes flicked toward the hotel, as if ensuring her audience was watching. She was, he thought, a woman who performed even in solitude. Nearby, Patrick Redfern lounged against a rock, his shirt unbuttoned to reveal a tanned chest. He was tossing a pebble in his hand, his smile directed at Arlena with an intimacy that bordered on brazen. "Care for a swim, Arlena?" he called, his voice carrying a teasing lilt. She responded, with a slow smile, stretching like a cat in the sun. "Perhaps, if you can keep up," she purred, her words a challenge wrapped in velvet. Poirot's mustache twitched. Such flirtations, he knew, were rarely innocent, and Patrick's easy charm was a spark in a tinderbox. From the cliff's edge, Christine Redfern watched, her slight figure half hidden by a gnarled pine. Her pale blue dress fluttered in the breeze, and her hands, clenched tightly, betrayed her composure. Poirot observed the rigidity of her posture, the way her eyes followed her husband's every move. She was not reading now, nor sketching. Her attention was wholly consumed by the scene below. When Arlena's laughter rang out again, Christine's lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned abruptly, disappearing down a side path. Poirot made a mental note. Jealousy, when silent, was often the most dangerous dot. At the hotel, the terrace was alive with the morning's rituals. Kenneth Marshall sat at a corner table, his typewriter clattering with steady precision. He was drafting letters, his face a mask of concentration, though Poirot noticed a faint crease between his brows when Arlena's voice drifted up from the cove. Kenneth's restraint was admirable, but Poirot wondered what simmered beneath it. A man married to a woman like Arlena could not remain untouched by her orbit. Was it love that held him, or something colder? Linda Marshall, meanwhile, sat cross-legged on a bench near the pool, her sketchbook open on her lap, her pencil scratched furiously, but her strokes were erratic, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. Poirot approached, his steps silent on the flagstones. "You draw the sea, Mademoiselle Linda?" he asked, his tone genial. She started, her dark eyes flashing with irritation. "No," she said curtly, snapping the book shut. "Just things." Poirot glimpsed a jagged sketch of a woman's face, distorted with anger, before the pages closed. He smiled benignly. "Art, it reveals the heart, does it not?" Linda's scowl deepened, and she stalked off toward the hotel, her braids swinging like a pendulum. Major Charles Barry, his face redder than the previous day, was holding forth at the bar, a glass of gin in hand, despite the early hour. "That Stewart woman," he boomed to a reluctant waiter, "knew her in London, years back. Borrowed a tidy sum for some play or other, never saw a penny back." His voice carried, and Poirot, seated nearby, caught the edge of bitterness in it. The Major's bluster was a facade, he suspected, hiding a grudge that had festered over time. Money, in Poirot's experience, was as potent a motive as love. Emily Brewster, her black dress as severe as ever, was pacing the terrace's edge, her notebook tucked under her arm. She paused to glare at Arlena's distant figure, her lips moving as if muttering a silent sermon. Poirot approached, his manner disarming. "The view, it is magnificent, is it not, mademoiselle?" he said, gesturing to the sea. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Magnificent for some," she replied tartly. "That woman down there, she's a blight on decency, leading men astray, flaunting her sins." Her voice trembled with righteous indignation, but Poirot detected a personal wound beneath the moralizing. He nodded, his expression one of polite interest, but his mind catalogued her words, a Puritan with a vendetta. The gardeners, Odell and Carey, were playing cards under a striped awning, their laughter a counterpoint to the tensions around them. Odell, his cigar sending curls of smoke into the air, was recounting a Broadway anecdote, but his eyes strayed to Arlena. Carey, her blonde hair gleaming, leaned forward to whisper, "She's trouble, Odell. Remember that business with the producer? Nearly ruined him." Odell nodded, his joviality dimming. "Some women," he muttered, "burn everything they touch." Poirot, passing by, caught their words and filed them away. Gossip, he knew, could be a map to hidden truths. Rosamond Darnley emerged from the hotel, her steps measured, her cream linen dress accentuating her quiet elegance. She paused to speak to Kenneth, her hand resting lightly on his table. Their conversation was brief, but Poirot noted the warmth in her eyes, a contrast to the cool detachment she showed elsewhere. When she moved on, Kenneth's gaze followed her, a flicker of something regret, perhaps crossing his face. Rosamond, Poirot thought, was a woman who knew her power but wielded it subtly. What role did she play in this drama, and what did she want from Kenneth Marshall? Poirot descended the cliff path to Gull Cove, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. The tide was low, exposing a strip of damp sand, dotted with shells. Arlena was now alone, Patrick having wandered off toward the sea. She lay back, her eyes closed. But Poirot sensed she was aware of his presence. "A fine morning, madame," he said, tipping his hat. She opened one eye, her smile languid. "Monsieur Poirot, isn't it? You're wasting your holiday watching us all. Don't you ever relax?" Her tone was teasing, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. Poirot chuckled. "For Hercule Poirot to observe is to relax." She laughed, but it was a hollow sound, and she turned away, dismissing him. As he climbed back to the hotel, Poirot's mind was a whirl of impressions. Arlena was the sun, drawing others into her orbit, but her light cast long shadows. Patrick's flirtation was reckless, Christine's pain a silent scream. Linda's resentment was raw, Kenneth's restraint a dam holding back unknown currents. Major Barry's grievance hinted at old wounds, Emily's disapproval at a deeper grudge. The gardener's gossip suggested a scandal that might yet surface, and Rosamond's quiet connection to Kenneth hinted at a past that could complicate the present. Back on the terrace, Poirot ordered a citron press, his eyes scanning the guests. The morning was still, yet the air felt charged, as if the island itself were holding its breath. He recalled a phrase from his youth: "La calme avant la tempête," the calm before the storm. The Jolly Roger, with its glittering facade, was a stage, and its players were poised for conflict. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the table, his mind arranging the pieces of this human puzzle. "Something," he murmured, "is coming, and Hercule Poirot will be ready." Chapter 4. The Discovery. The sun stood at its zenith over Smuggler's Island, its light unrelenting as it bathed the Jolly Roger Hotel in a fierce glow. Hercule Poirot, seated in the hotel lounge with a glass of mineral water, was reviewing his observations of the morning's tensions when a piercing scream shattered the midday calm. It came from the direction of Gull Cove, sharp and urgent, cutting through the murmur of waves and the chatter of guests. Poirot set down his glass, his senses alert, and rose with the measured calm of a man accustomed to crisis. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the curtain, it rises." The scream belonged to Emily Brewster, who stumbled onto the terrace, her face ashen beneath her severe black hat. Her dress was damp from the sea, and her hands trembled as she clutched the railing. "She's dead," Emily gasped, her voice raw. "Arlena's steward down at the cove. She's been strangled." A hush fell over the terrace, followed by a flurry of gasps and hurried footsteps. The hotel manager, pale and flustered, rushed to her side, while guests gathered, their faces a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. Poirot, his eyes gleaming with purpose, followed the manager as he summoned the staff to secure the path to Gull Cove. The descent to the cove was steep, the sandy path winding through jagged rocks and thorny gorse. Poirot navigated it with care, his cane steadying his steps, his mind already racing. Emily, still trembling, led the way, her words tumbling out in fragments. "I was swimming," she said, her voice tight. "I came round the point and saw her lying there, so still. I thought she was sunbathing at first, but then I saw her throat." Her voice broke, and she looked away, her lips pressed into a grim line. Poirot nodded, his expression one of sympathetic encouragement. But his eyes were scanning the surroundings, noting every detail at Gull Cove. The scene was starkly serene. Arlena Stewart lay on her striped towel, her green swimsuit vivid against the pale sand. Her auburn hair fanned out like a halo, but her face was a mask of death, her emerald eyes staring blankly at the sky. Around her throat, angry red marks told of a violent end. The tide lapped gently at the shore, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries a mournful counterpoint to the silence of the body. Poirot knelt beside her, his gloved hands careful not to disturb the scene. The towel was pristine, unrumpled, as if she had never moved upon it. The sand around her bore no footprints, save for a single set Emily's leading from the water's edge. "C'est curieux," Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing the air above the towel. "No sand on her body, no creases in the cloth. She lies as if placed, not fallen." He examined her hands, noting the manicured nails, free of sand or struggle. A faint scent of suntan oil lingered, but the bottle beside her was nearly full, its cap tightly screwed. Poirot's mustache twitched. A woman who sunbathes, yet uses so little oil. This is not natural. The hotel doctor, a wiry man named Dr. Langley, arrived, his medical bag in hand. He knelt beside Arlena, his fingers probing her neck with practiced efficiency. "Strangulation," he confirmed, his voice low. "Likely within the last hour, perhaps between 11 and noon. The marks suggest a cord or scar, something thin but strong." Poirot nodded, his eyes flicking to the horizon where the tide was beginning to rise. "And the body, it is warm?" he asked. Langley nodded. "Still warm, yes. She hasn't been dead long." Poirot stood, his gaze sweeping the cove. The cliffs loomed above, their faces sheer and unyielding, accessible only by the path or by sea. No boat was in sight, and the path was visible from the hotel's terrace. He turned to Emily, who stood apart, her arms crossed tightly. "You saw her, mademoiselle, before you screamed?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. Emily nodded, her eyes avoiding his. "She was lying there, just as you see her, I thought. She was asleep at first, but then I saw her face. Those marks." Her voice faltered, and she shivered despite the heat. Poirot noted the precision of her words, the way her hands twisted together. Was it fear, or something else? The manager, wringing his hands, announced that the police had been summoned. Guests began to gather at the cliff's edge above, their voices a low hum of speculation. Kenneth Marshall appeared, his face pale but composed, his gray eyes fixed on the body below. "Arlena," he said softly, almost to himself, and Poirot caught a flicker of something grief, perhaps, or relief in his expression. Linda, trailing behind her father, stared at her stepmother's body with wide eyes, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. She said nothing, but her silence was heavy, her lips trembling. Patrick Redfern pushed through the crowd, his face drained of color. "My God," he whispered, his eyes locked on Arlena. Christine, at his side, gripped his arm, her knuckles white. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of shock that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Major Barry, his glass still in hand, muttered something about damned shame, while the gardeners whispered furiously, their eyes darting between the body and the onlookers. Rosamond Darnley stood apart, her face calm but her hands clasped tightly, as if holding herself in check. Poirot returned to the body, his mind a whirl of questions. The absence of footprints was troubling. Even a murderer fleeing the scene would leave some trace. The towel's pristine state suggested Arlena had not struggled, nor even lain naturally, and the timing between 11 and noon, according to the doctor, clashed with Emily's claim of seeing Arlena alive earlier. "There is a puzzle here," Poirot said to the manager, his voice low. "The sand, the towel, the time, they do not align. Hercule Poirot, he will find the truth." As the police boat appeared on the horizon, Poirot took a final look at the cove. The tide was creeping higher, its waves licking at the edges of the towel. Arlena's cigarette case lay nearby, its silver surface catching the sun. Poirot bent to examine it, noting the initials PR etched into the metal. Patrick Redfern's, perhaps, or another clue in this intricate game. He straightened, his eyes gleaming. The Jolly Roger, with its sunlit beauty, had become a stage for murder, and Poirot knew the players were hiding more than they revealed. "A long way," he murmured, turning back to the path. "The game, it has begun." Chapter 5. The Alibis. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Jolly Roger Hotel's terrace as Hercule Poirot stood by the railing, his eyes fixed on the shimmering horizon. The discovery of Arlena Stuart's body had transformed the hotel into a hive of whispers and sidelong glances, each guest a player in a drama now tinged with suspicion. Inspector Colgate, a sturdy man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense air, had arrived from the mainland, his notebook open and his pencil poised. He deferred to Poirot with a respectful nod, aware of the detective's reputation. "A nasty business, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his Devon accent clipped. "I'd be grateful for your insight." "Shall we begin with the alibis?" Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching with anticipation. "Oui, Inspector. The alibis, they are the skeleton of the crime. Let us see what flesh we can put upon them." They moved to the hotel lounge, a spacious room with tall windows and wicker furniture, where the guests had been gathered. The air was heavy with tension, the clink of teacups and the rustle of newspapers replaced by a strained silence. Poirot's gaze swept over the assembled faces, each a mask, hiding truths or lies. Inspector Colgate began with Kenneth Marshall, who sat ramrod straight in an armchair, his hands folded calmly. Mr. Marshall, Colgate said. Where were you between 11 and noon today? Kenneth's gray eyes met the inspector's without flinching. I was in the lounge here, typing business letters, he replied, his voice even. I started around 10 and didn't leave until the scream came, just past noon. The barman, hovering nearby, nodded confirmation. Saw him there, sir, tapping away at that typewriter. Didn't move, far as I could tell. Poirot noted the precision of Kenneth's alibi, its very solidity raising a question. Was it too perfect, too rehearsed? Next was Linda Marshall, who slouched in a corner, her sketchbook clutched like a shield. Her dark eyes darted nervously as Colgate approached. Miss Marshall, your whereabouts? He asked. Linda's voice was sullen but clear. I was sketching, on the cliff path above Ladder Bay, with Christine Redfern. From about 10:30 until we heard the scream. She hesitated, then added, we were together the whole time. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. The girl's tone held a defensive edge, as if she were protecting more than her own movements. Christine Redfern, pale and composed, confirmed Linda's story. We were sketching together, she said, her voice soft but steady. The view from the cliff is lovely, and we lost track of time. She produced a small sketch of the coastline, delicate but unremarkable. Poirot studied her, noting the faint tremor in her hands as she passed the drawing to Colgate. Her alibi dovetailed neatly with Linda's, yet Poirot sensed a fragility in her composure, like porcelain under strain. You saw no one else, madame? He asked gently. Christine shook her head. No one, just the sea and the cliffs. Patrick Redfern, lounging against a window frame, was questioned next. His boyish charm was dimmed, his face drawn. I was swimming at Ladder Bay, he said, running a hand through his dark hair. Went down around 10:45, I'd say. Stayed in the water until I heard the commotion. Colgate raised an eyebrow. Alone, Mr. Redfern. Patrick nodded, a touch too quickly. Yes, alone. The bay's quiet, good for a swim. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, noting the slight flush in his cheeks. An alibi without witnesses was no alibi at all, and Patrick's connection to Arlena made his solitude suspicious. Rosamond Darnley, poised and elegant in a tailored blouse, spoke with calm assurance. I was size in my room, working on dress designs, she said, her hazel eyes meeting Colgate's directly. I didn't leave until I heard the scream, just after noon. She offered no corroboration, but her manner was unflappable, as if daring doubt. Poirot observed the faint lines of tension around her mouth, wondering what secrets lay behind her polished exterior. Her room, he recalled, overlooked Gulkova detail worth remembering. Major Charles Barry, his face flushed from more than the sun, was sprawled in a chair, a fresh glass of whiskey in hand. In the bar, old boy, he said to Colgate, his voice loud but unsteady. Been there since breakfast, chatting with the barman. Fine fellow, pours a decent measure. The barman nodded reluctantly, confirming the major's presence. He was here, sir, talking my ear off about India. Poirot noted the major's bluster, but also the way his eyes flicked toward the terrace, as if avoiding scrutiny. A man, with debts, he thought, might have reasons to lie. Odell and Carrie Gardner, the American couple, were next, their voices bright but subdued. We were playing bridge on the terrace, Odell said, his cigar unlit for once. Started around 10, didn't stop until the scream. Carrie nodded, her blonde curls bouncing. Just the two of us, but the waiter brought us coffee around 11, so he saw us. The waiter summoned, confirmed their story. Poirot listened, his mind noting the convenience of their mutual alibi. Spectators perhaps, but spectators could see more than they admitted. Emily Brewster, still shaken, sat rigidly, her black dress absorbing the light. I was swimming off Gull Cove, she said, her voice sharp with indignation. I came round the point just before noon and saw her Arleno lying there, I thought. She was sunbathing until I got closer, her hands twisted in her lap, and Poirot caught a flicker of something guilt, perhaps, or fear in her eyes. You saw her alive earlier, mademoiselle? He asked, his tone mild. Emily nodded vigorously. Yes, at 11:30, waving from her towel. I swam past, then came back later, and found her. Poirot's mustache twitched. The timing was precise, yet it clashed with the doctor's estimate of death. As Colgate concluded the interviews, Poirot stepped to the window, his mind sifting through the alibis like cards in a deck. Each guest was accounted for, their stories interlocking with a neatness that felt artificial. Kenneth's typing, Linda and Christine's sketching, Patrick's solitary swim, Rosamond's designing, the Major's drinking, the gardener's bridge, Emily's swim, all were plausible, yet none felt entirely true. C'est trop parfait, Poirot murmured to Colgate. When everyone has an alibi, Inspector, it is often because someone has planned it so. He turned back to the room, his eyes scanning the guests. Kenneth's calm was a fortress, but fortresses could hide cracks. Linda's sullenness masked a deeper turmoil, and Christine's fragility hinted at hidden strength. Patrick's charm was fraying, Rosamond's poise controlled, the Major's bluster covered something raw, and the gardener's gossip suggested knowledge they hadn't shared. Emily's story, with its vivid detail of Arlena waving, was the linchpin, yet it felt rehearsed. Like a line from a script, Inspector Poirot said, his voice low, "We must look beyond the words. The truth, it hides in the silences, in the glances, in the things unsaid." Colgate nodded, his respect for Poirot evident. "What's your next move, sir?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "To observe, to listen, to think. The little gray cells, they will find the flaw in this perfect picture." As the guests dispersed, their alibis hanging in the air like smoke, Poirot felt the weight of the puzzle. Arlena's death was no random act. It was a performance, and he would uncover its director. Chapter 6. The puzzle of the sunbather. Late afternoon sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over Smuggler's Island. Hercule Poirot stood alone at Gull Cove, the scene of Arlena Stuart's murder, his straw hat tilted against the fading light. The tide had receded, leaving the sand smooth and glistening, as if the sea itself wished to erase the morning's tragedy. Poirot's eyes, keen and unyielding, traced the contours of the cove, lingering on the spot where our body had lain. The striped towel was gone, taken by Inspector Colgate's men, but its image lingered in Poirot's mind, pristine, unrumpled, a silent witness to a crime that defied logic. "C'est une énigme," he murmured, his cane tracing a slow circle. "In the sand, the sunbather who does not sunbathe. It is the heart of the matter." Poirot knelt where the towel had been, his gloved fingers hovering over the sand. No footprints marred the surface, save for Emily Brewster's, which led from the water's edge to the body and back. The absence of other tracks was perplexing. A murderer, even one who fled by sea, would leave some trace: disturbed sand, a scuff, a droplet of water. Yet the cove was as untouched as a painter's canvas. Poirot's gaze shifted to the cliffs above, their jagged faces offering no easy path. The tide, high between 11 and noon, would have cut off access by sea, and the cliff path was visible from the hotel. How, then, he mused, does one kill and vanish like a ghost? He rose, brushing sand from his trousers, and examined the spot where Arlena's cigarette case had been found. The silver case, engraved with the initials PR, had been sent to the police for examination, but Poirot recalled its placement, neatly beside the towel, as if deliberately set. A prop, he said softly, or a misdirection. The case suggested Patrick Redfern, but Poirot was wary of obvious clues. In his experience, the truth was rarely so accommodating. Returning to the hotel, Poirot sought out Emily Brewster, who was seated in the lounge, her black dress absorbing the light of a nearby lamp. Her face was drawn, her hands folded tightly over her notebook. "Mademoiselle Brewster," Poirot began, his tone courteous but probing. "You are certain you saw Madame Stuart alive at 11:30, waving from her towel?" Emily's eyes met his, sharp with defiance. "Quite certain," she said. "I was swimming, came round the point, and saw her there, bold as brass, waving as if she owned the place." Her voice carried a bitter edge, and Poirot noted the precision of her recollection. "And she was lying on the towel?" he pressed. Emily nodded, her lips thinning. "Yes, sprawled out, sunbathing as usual." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." He excused himself, his mind turning over her words. Emily's account placed Arlena alive at 11:30, yet Dr. Langley's estimate suggested death closer to 11 o'clock. The discrepancy was no accident. Someone had manipulated the timeline. Poirot recalled the towel's pristine state, no creases, no sand clinging to Arlena's body. A sunbather in his experience left traces. Sand on skin, a rumpled towel, perhaps a smear of suntan oil. Arlena's scene lacked all these. She was not sunbathing, he concluded, but made to appear so. He sought out the hotel's tide charts, kept in the manager's office. The manager, still shaken, handed them over with a nervous smile. "Anything to help, Monsieur Poirot." The charts confirmed that Gull Cove was inaccessible by sea. From 11 o'clock to 12:30, the tide high and the current strong. The cliff path, though steep, was the only land route, and its visibility from the terrace made a secret approach unlikely. Poirot's fingers tapped the desk. If the murderer did not come by sea, nor by land, then the crime, it was staged elsewhere. N'est-ce pas? He returned to the lounge, where Inspector Colgate was reviewing notes. "A queer case, Monsieur Poirot," Colgate said, rubbing his chin. "Everyone's accounted for, yet no one's story feels quite right." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. "The alibis, Inspector, they are like a house of cards, perfect, until one examines closely. Consider the towel. It was not used, not disturbed. Madame Stuart, she was placed there, after death, to create the illusion of a sunbather murdered in situ." Colgate's brow furrowed. "You mean she was killed elsewhere and moved?" Poirot inclined his head precisely. "The absence of footprints, the untouched towel, these are not accidents. The murderer, they wished us to believe she died at noon, but the body, it tells a different story." He paused, his mind racing. "And Mademoiselle Brewster's citing it is too convenient, too vivid. Perhaps she saw what she was meant to see." Colgate leaned forward, intrigued. "You think someone impersonated Mrs. Stuart?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "It is a possibility, Inspector. A woman in a green swimsuit, a hat to shield the face, waving from a distance. Such a performance could deceive. We must ask, who had the opportunity, and who had the motive?" He thought of Patrick Redfern's solitary swim, Christine's sketching with Linda, Kenneth's typing, Rosamond's seclusion. Each alibi was a thread, and one, he was certain, would unravel. Poirot stepped onto the terrace, where the guests were gathered in uneasy clusters. Kenneth Marshall stood alone, staring at the sea, his face unreadable. Linda sat nearby, her sketchbook closed, her eyes red-rimmed. Patrick and Christine spoke in low tones, their hands not touching. Major Barry, at the bar, was quieter than usual, his glass untouched. The gardeners whispered, their eyes darting to Poirot, while Rosamond Darnley sketched in a notebook, her calm a stark contrast to the tension around her. Emily Brewster, alone, glared at the horizon, her lips moving silently. Poirot's gaze lingered on each, his mind constructing a tableau. The puzzle of the sunbather was no mere detail. It was the key to the crime. Someone had staged our death, manipulating time and perception. "The little gray cells," he murmured, they see what others miss. As the sun sank lower, painting the sky in hues of crimson, Poirot felt the threads of the case tightening. The truth was close, hidden in the shadows of the alibis, waiting for Hercule Poirot to bring it to light. Chapter 7. Motives and Secrets. The evening air settled over Smuggler's Island like a velvet curtain, the sun's last rays gilding the Jolly Roger Hotel in a soft, deceptive glow. Hercule Poirot, seated in the hotel's library, a quiet room, lined with leather-bound books and flickering lamps, sipped a tisane, his sharp eyes reflecting the lamplight. The day's events had cast a pall over the guests, their earlier vivacity replaced by guarded glances and hushed tones. Arlena Stuart's murder was no longer a mere shock. It was a lens, magnifying the hidden currents of resentment, desire, and betrayal among the hotel's denizens. Poirot, ever the observer of human nature, knew that motives were the roots of crime, and he was determined to unearth them. He began with Linda Marshall, whom he found in a corner of the lounge, her sketchbook abandoned on a table. Her dark eyes were stormy, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her sleeve. "Mademoiselle Linda," Poirot said, his voice gentle as he took a seat beside her. "You did not love your stepmother, n'est-ce pas?" Linda's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing. "She was horrible," she blurted, then bit her lip, as if regretting the outburst. Poirot's mustache twitched, but his expression remained kind. "Horrible? How so? Speak freely, petite. I am here to listen." Linda hesitated, then the words tumbled out. "She took everything father's attention, my mother's place. She was always laughing, always showing off, making everyone look at her. I hated how she made father look small." Her voice cracked, and she looked away, her hands clenching. Poirot noted the raw edge of her anger, the pain of a child overshadowed by a dazzling interloper. "You were with Madame Redfern, sketching, when it happened?" he asked softly. Linda nodded, her eyes flickering. "Yes, all morning. Christine's. Nice she doesn't treat me like a kid." Poirot smiled, but his mind marked the loyalty in her tone. Linda's hatred was a motive, but her alibi, tied to Christine, held for now. Next, Poirot sought Patrick Redfern, who was pacing the terrace, his usual charm replaced by a restless energy. The sea murmured below, its rhythm a counterpoint to Patrick's agitation. "Monsieur Redfern," Poirot began, joining him at the railing, "you were close to Madame Stuart. Patrick's jaw tightened, his eyes avoiding Poirot's. "We were friends," he said, his voice clipped. "She was lively, fun. Nothing more." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Yet your wife? She did not approve of this friendship." Patrick's hands gripped the railing. "Christine's sensitive. She misunderstood. Arlena was just being herself." His words were defensive, but Poirot caught the flush of guilt in his face. Patrick's infatuation was a spark that could ignite a motive, and his unwitnessed swim left room for suspicion. Christine Redfern was in her room, the door ajar, when Poirot knocked. She sat by the window, her pale face framed by the dusk, a book of poetry unopened in her lap. "Madame," Poirot said, bowing slightly, "may I intrude?" She nodded, her eyes wary, but composed. "You were sketching with Mademoiselle Linda," he said, settling into a chair. "Yet your heart, it was heavy, none." Christine's fingers tightened on the book. I saw Patrick with Arlena," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was always with her, laughing, forgetting me." Her eyes glistened, but she straightened, her voice steadying. "I stayed with Linda to keep busy. I didn't want to think about it." Poirot noted her pain, raw but controlled. Jealousy, he knew, could drive a quiet soul to desperate acts. In the bar, Major Charles Barry was nursing a whiskey, his boisterous manner subdued. Poirot approached, his demeanor genial. "Major, you spoke of a debt with Madame Stuart," he said, his tone conversational. Barry's eyes narrowed, his glass pausing mid-sip. Old business, he growled. Lent her £500 for some theatrical venture years ago. Never saw a shilling back. Typical of her sort, charming you out of your wallet, then vanishing. His bitterness was palpable, and Poirot wondered if the debt was merely financial. A man like Barry, humiliated by a woman, might harbor a grudge worth killing for. Kenneth Marshall, found in the hotel's writing room, was sorting papers, his movements precise, despite the day's upheaval. "Monsieur Marshall," Poirot said, taking a seat. "Your wife? She was a woman of extravagance. Kenneth's gray eyes met Poirot's cool and guarded. "Arlena lived expensively," he admitted. "Clothes, jewels, party sit. Added up, I managed, but it strained things." His voice was flat, but Poirot caught a flicker of weariness. "You did not resent this?" Poirot pressed. Kenneth's lips thinned. "Resentment doesn't solve debts. I dealt with it." His restraint was a fortress, but Poirot sensed cracks, perhaps not enough to kill, but enough to conceal. Rosamond Darnley was on the terrace, sketching a design under a lantern's glow. Her poise was unshaken, but her eyes held a quiet intensity. "Mademoiselle Darnley," Poirot said, joining her, "you and Monsieur Marshall, you share a history." "Nan." Rosamond's pencil paused, her smile faint. "We were friends as children," she said. "Nothing more." Poirot tilted his head. "Yet you watch him now, with the eyes of one who cares." Her gaze sharpened, but she laughed softly. "You see too much, Monsieur Poirot. Kenneth is a friend, nothing else. Arlena was. Not my concern." Her denial was smooth, but Poirot sensed a longing, perhaps a motive buried in the past. The gardeners, sipping cocktails in the lounge, were less guarded. Carrie leaned forward, her eyes bright with gossip. "Arlena was trouble," she said, her voice low. "Back in London, she had an affair with a producer, married, of course. Nearly ruined his career when it came out." Odell nodded, his cigar glowing. "She had a way of wrecking things. Men, marriages, reputations." Their words were eager, but Poirot noted their detachment. They were observers, yet their knowledge hinted at a deeper involvement. Could gossip fuel a motive, or were they merely relishing the scandal? Poirot retired to his room, his mind a kaleidoscope of motives. Linda's hatred was visceral, a child's rage against a usurper. Patrick's infatuation was reckless, a flame that could burn him or others. Christine's jealousy was a quiet poison, her pain a potential catalyst. Barry's financial grudge was steeped in wounded pride, while Kenneth's strained finances suggested a man pushed to the edge. Rosamond's past with Kenneth hinted at unspoken desires, and the gardener's gossip carried the weight of hidden truths. Each motive was a thread, but none yet explained the pristine crime scene or the manipulated timeline. As he gazed out his window at the moonlit sea, poor thoughts returned to the cove, the untouched towel, the absent footprints. The cigarette case, with its tantalizing initials, these were not accidents, but clues, carefully placed. "The murderer," he murmured. "They are clever, but not cleverer than Hercule Poirot." The motives were clear, but the method was elusive. He closed his eyes, letting his little gray cells work. The truth was there, in the secrets and silences, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 8. The clue of the Bath. The moon hung low over Smuggler's Island, its silvery light casting a ghostly sheen across the Jolly Roger Hotel. Hercule Poirot, seated at a small desk in his room, pored over his notes, the faint scratch of his pen mingling with the distant murmur of the sea. The day's revelations, motives, simmering beneath polished surfaces. Alibis too neatly aligned had deepened the mystery of Arlena Stuart's murder. Yet Poirot's little gray cells were restless, circling a detail that seemed trivial, but glowed with significance. He closed his notebook, his eyes gleaming. "C'est toujours les petites choses," he murmured, "the little things that unlock the truth." The morning brought a fresh breeze, carrying the scent of salt and pine. through the hotel's open windows. Poirot, impeccable, in a light gray suit, sought out the chambermaid, a young woman named Elsie, who was polishing the banister in the corridor. Her eyes widened at his approach, but his genial smile put her at ease. "Mademoiselle Elsie," he began, his tone warm, "you cleaned the rooms of the guests. Tell me, did you notice anything unusual yesterday, before the tragedy at Gull Cove?" Elsie hesitated, her cloth pausing. "Well, sir," she said, her voice low. "There was one thing. Mrs. Christine Redfern, she took a bath. At 11:15. I heard the water running when I was tidying the hall. Seemed odd, mid-morning like that." Poirot's mustache twitched, a spark igniting in his mind. "A bath, at such an hour. Très intéressant. You are certain of the time?" Elsie nodded, her cheeks flushing. "Yes, sir. I checked my watch, 'cause I was running late for the next floor." Poirot thanked her, his mind racing. A bath at 11:15 was no casual act. It suggested purpose, perhaps the need to wash away evidence, sand, salt, or something less tangible. Christine's alibi, sketching with Linda, had seemed solid, but this anomaly cracked its surface. He made his way to Christine Redfern's room, knocking softly. She answered, her pale face framed by a simple blouse, her blonde hair pinned neatly. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes wary. "What brings you here?" Poirot bowed, his manner disarming. "A small matter, madame. Your sketching yesterday, it was most productive. Nan, may I see your work?" Christine hesitated, then retrieved her sketchbook, opening it to a page showing a delicate rendering of the coastline. Poirot studied it, noting the smudged lines, as if drawn in haste. "Charmant," he said, "but it lacks detail, perhaps. You were distracted, maybe." Christine's hands tightened on the book. "It was a difficult morning," she admitted, her voice low. "I was with Linda, but my mind was elsewhere." Poirot nodded, his eyes gentle but probing. "And the bath, madame? At 11:15, you took a bath. Unusual, for such a time." Her face paled, her fingers trembling. I felt warm after sketching in the sun," she said quickly. "I needed to freshen up." Poirot smiled, but his mind marked the falter in her voice. A bath to cool off, or to wash away traces of a visit to Gull Cove. Next, Poirot visited Arlena's room, now sealed by the police, but accessible with Inspector Colgate's permission. The room was a study in extravagance. Silk dresses draped over chairs, a vanity cluttered with perfumes and cosmetics, a faint scent of jasmine lingering. Poirot's eyes fell on a bottle of suntan oil, its label pristine, its contents barely diminished. He unscrewed the cap, sniffing the faint coconut aroma. "A woman who sunbathes daily," he murmured, "yet her oil, it is almost untouched." The bottle, like the pristine towel, suggested a performance and illusion of a sunbather who never was. He examined the room further, noting a pair of green high-heeled sandals, their soles clean of sand. A scarf, emerald, to match our swimsuit, lay folded on the bed. Poirot's fingers brushed its silk, his mind recalling the strangulation marks on Arlena's throat. Could this be the weapon, carefully returned to its place? He made a mental note to ask Colgate to test it for traces of skin or hair. The room, like the crime scene, was too orderly, too staged. "The murderer," he said softly. "They are meticulous, but not invisible." Returning to the terrace, Poirot found Inspector Colgate conferring with a constable. "Monsieur Poirot," Colgate said, his face grim, "we found nothing new at the Coveno Prince. No fibers. Just that cigarette case with PR initials. Likely Redfern's, but he claims he lost it weeks ago." Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. "The case, it is a distraction, perhaps. But the bath, Inspector Madame Redfern's bath, at 11:15, this is a clue. She claims to have been sketching, yet she bathes mid-morning. Why? To remove sand, perhaps, from a place she should not have been. Colgate's brow furrowed. You think she was at Gull Cove? Poirot shrugged, his expression enigmatic. I think, Inspector, that the truth hides in the ordinary. A bath, a bottle of oil, a clean towel, these are not accidents. Someone has planned this crime with care, to shift the time of death. He paused, his gaze sweeping the terrace where guests lingered, their faces taut with unease. Patrick Redfern smoked nervously. Christine watched him from a distance, her eyes shadowed. Linda scribbled in her sketchbook, her strokes angry. Kenneth typed in the lounge, his focus unbroken. Rosamond sketched designs, her calm a mask. The gardeners whispered, their glances darting. Major Barry drank, his bluster muted. Mine turned to Emily Brewster's sighting of Arlena at 11:30, waving from the towel. The contradiction with the doctor's timeline gnawed at him. If Madame Stewart was dead by 11, he mused, then who did Mademoiselle Brewster see? A double, perhaps, playing the part of the living Arlena. The idea was bold, but Poirot had seen such deceptions before. A woman in a green swimsuit, a hat to obscure the face, could fool a distant observer. Christine, with her delicate frame, could mimic Arlena's pose, especially if guided by a partner. He approached the cliff path, testing the distance to Gull Cove. The walk took 10 minutes, the return slightly longer. A bath at 11:15 could follow a swift visit to the cove, washing away sand or guilt. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The little gray cells, they begin to see. The bath, it is not for comfort, it is for concealment. As he returned to the hotel, the stars emerged, their light cold and clear. The puzzle was taking shape, its pieces scattered among the guests' secrets. Poirot felt the truth drawing closer, a shadow in the moonlight, waiting for him to name it. Chapter 9. The tide and the time. The dawn broke over Smuggler's Island with a pale, opalescent light, the sea whispering secrets against the rocky shore. Hercule Poirot, dressed in a crisp linen suit, stood at the edge of the cliff path, his eyes fixed on the rhythm of the tide below. The Jolly Roger Hotel, its white walls glowing in the early light, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the unraveling mystery within its bounds. Arlena Stewart's murder had cast a net of suspicion over the guests, and Poirot's little gray cells were now focused on a single, elusive thread: the manipulation of time. The tide, the alibis, the pristine crime scene all pointed to a carefully orchestrated deception, and Poirot was determined to trace its currents. He descended to Gull Cove, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the sandy path. The beach was empty now, the police having cleared the scene, but Poirot could still see Arlena's body in his mind's eye, laid out like a mannequin on the unrumpled towel. The tide charts, studied the previous evening, confirmed that Gull Cove was cut off by high tide from 11 o'clock to 12:30, accessible only by boat or the steep cliff path. Yet no boat had been reported, and the path was visible from the hotel's terrace, where guests and staff had been present all morning. Impossible, Poirot murmured, unless the crime was not committed where it appeared. He stood at the water's edge, the waves lapping at his polished shoes. The tide's rhythm was predictable, its rise and fall a natural clock. If Arlena was killed before 11 o'clock, as Dr. Langley's estimate suggested, her body must have been moved to the cove during a narrow window when the tide allowed access. But how? And why stage the scene so meticulously? Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind turning to Emily Brewster's claim of seeing Arlena, alive at 11:30, waving from the towel. The contradiction was stark, and Poirot suspected it was sleight of hand to confuse the timeline. Returning to the hotel, Poirot sought out Patrick Redfern, whose solitary swim at Ladder Bay intrigued him. He found Patrick on the terrace, sipping coffee, his face drawn and his eyes restless. "Monsieur Redfern," Poirot said, settling beside him, "your swim yesterday, it was vigorous. You reached Ladder Bay by sea, not by land. Patrick nodded, his fingers tightening on his cup. Yes, I swam round the point. It's a tough route, but I like the challenge. Poirot's mustache twitched. And you saw no one, no boats, no figures on the shore. Patrick shook his head, his gaze flickering. Just the sea. I was alone. Poirot excused himself and walked to Ladder Bay, a smaller cove west of Gull Cove, accessible by a rocky sea route. He timed the journey, wading through shallow waters where the tide permitted. The swim, he estimated, would take a fit man like Patrick 15 minutes each way, leaving ample time for other activities between 10:45 and noon. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A swim, it is a convenient alibi and scene, unverified. But what did Monsieur Redfern do in those unaccounted minutes? Back at the hotel, Poirot sought Linda Marshall, who was sketching near the pool, her strokes less angry than before, but still tense. Mademoiselle Linda, he said, his tone gentle. You and Madame Redfern, you were sketching together, Yet perhaps there was a moment when she left you. Linda's pencil paused, her dark eyes meeting his with a flicker of unease. She went to get a shawl, she admitted. Said she was chilly, about 11. She wasn't gone long, 10 minutes, maybe. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. 10 minutes was enough to reach Gull Cove, to stage a scene, to return. Merci, petite. You are most helpful. He found Christine Redfern in the lounge, her delicate hands folding a scarf emerald green, like Arlena's. Poirot's heart quickened, but he kept his expression bland. Madame, he said, your shawl, it is most elegant. You fetched it yesterday, during your sketching. Christine's eyes widened briefly, then she nodded. Yes, I felt a chill. I went to my room and came right back. Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the slight tremor in her fingers. Her room overlooked Gull Cove, a vantage point for observation or action. The bath, at 11:15. The shawl at 11 o'clock. These were not coincidences, but pieces of a deliberate puzzle. Poirot returned to the tide charts, cross-referencing them with the alibis. The window for moving Arlena's body was narrow, between 10:30 and 11 o'clock, before the tide rose. Someone had placed her at Gull Cove, arranging the towel and cigarette case to suggest a recent death. Emily's sighting at 11:30 was the linchpin. Yet Poirot was certain it was false, not a lie, but a deception. A woman in a green swimsuit, he murmured, seen from a distance, under a hat. Not Arlena, but another, playing her part. Christine, with her access to the cove and her brief absence, was a candidate, but she would need an accomplice to kill and move the body. He sought Inspector Colgate, who was interviewing staff in the manager's office. Monsieur Poirot, Colgate said, looking up, we've got nothing new. The cigarette case is Redfern's, but he sticks to his story, lost it weeks ago. No fingerprints on it, wiped clean. Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. The tide. Inspector, it is our witness. The body was placed before 11, yet Mademoiselle Brewster saw a living Arlena at past. This is no mistake, it is a performance. We must find who played the role, and who directed. Colgate rubbed his chin. You're thinking a double, like you said before? Poirot inclined his head. Presentiment. The tide locks the cove, the path is watched, yet the crime appears. Someone has bent time itself to deceive us. He paused, his mind turning to the guests. Patrick's unwitnessed swim, Christine's absence, Linda's loyalty, Kenneth's stoic typing, Rosamond's solitude, the Major's drinking, the gardener's gossip. Each was a piece, but the puzzle's shape was emerging, a crime, planned with precision, its truth hidden in the ebb and flow of the tide. As Poirot stepped onto the terrace, the morning sun climbed higher, its light harsh and revealing. The guests moved like shadows, their alibis fraying under scrutiny. He felt the weight of the case, its complexity a challenge to his little gray cells. The time, he murmured, it is the key, and Hercule Poirot, he will turn it. The tide was rising again, and with it, the truth was drawing closer, ready to break the surface. Chapter 10. The Reconstruction. The sun hung low over Smuggler's Island, its golden rays softening the harsh edges of the Jolly Roger Hotel's whitewashed walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the hotel lounge, the gathered guests forming a tense semicircle. Around him, the air was thick with anticipation, the murmur of the sea, a faint underscore to the silence of expectation. Inspector Colgate, his notebook tucked away, stood at Poirot's side, his weathered face attentive. The alibis, motives, and clues: the pristine towel, the unused suntan oil, Christine's bath. The manipulated tide had coalesced in Poirot's mind into a pattern, a tapestry of deception woven with meticulous care. Now, it was time to unravel it. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, his small frame commanding the room. We stand in the shadow of a crime most cunning, the murder of Madame Arlena Stuart. But Hercule Poirot, he does not accept the impossible. The truth, it is here, hidden in the details you thought insignificant. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, swept over the guests. Kenneth Marshall, rigid with dignity. Linda, clutching her sketchbook. Patrick Redfern, his charm faded. Christine, pale and still. Major Barry, his glass unsteady. The gardeners, whispering. Rosamond Darnley, poised but watchful. Emily Brewster, her lips tight with disapproval. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. Let us reconstruct the morning of the crime. Madame Stuart, she is found at Gull Cove, strangled, her body arranged on a towel, yet the towel, it is untouched, no creases, no sand. The sand around her, it bears no footprints, save those of Mademoiselle Brewster, who discovers her. The doctor, he says death came between 11 and noon. Yet Mademoiselle Brewster swears she saw Madame Stuart alive at 11:30, waving from her towel. This, it is a contradiction. N'est-ce pas? Emily Brewster stirred, her voice sharp. I know what I saw, Monsieur Poirot. She was alive, waving, bold as ever. Poirot raised a hand, his smile enigmatic. Patience, mademoiselle. We shall return to your sighting. But first, the tide. It locks Gull Cove from 11 to 12:30, accessible only by the cliff path, which is seen from the terrace, or by boat, yet none was reported. How then, does a murderer kill and vanish? The answer, it is simple. The murder, it did not happen at Gull Cove. A murmur rippled through the room, and Kenneth Marshall's gray eyes narrowed. Poirot continued, undeterred. The body, it was moved to the cove, placed to suggest a death at noon. But Madame Stuart, she was killed earlier, before 11, in a place more private, perhaps her room, perhaps another. The towel, the absence of sand, the unused suntan oil, these tell us she did not sunbathe that day. She was staged a mannequin in a play. Patrick Redfern shifted, his face pale. You're saying someone carried her body down there? That's absurd. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not absurd, monsieur, but clever. The tide allowed a brief window, before 11, to place the body. The path was not watched every moment. But the key, it is the sighting, at 11:30. If Madame Stuart was dead, who did Mademoiselle Brewster see? He turned to Emily, his gaze piercing. You saw a woman in a green swimsuit, under a hat, waving from a distance. You assumed it was Madame Stuart, but it was not. It was another, playing her part to confuse the time of death. Emily's face reddened, but she said nothing. Poirot's voice softened, addressing the room. Who could impersonate Madame Stuart? A woman of similar height, perhaps, with access to her swimsuit. Her hat, her manner, someone who knew the cove, the tide, the plan. Christine Redfern's hands clenched, her knuckles white. Poirot's eyes lingered on her, then moved to Patrick. Madame Redfern, you were sketching with Mademoiselle Linda. Yet you left briefly, to fetch a shawl, oui. And then, at 11:15, you took a bath. Why? To wash away sand, perhaps, from a visit to Gull Cove. Christine's lips parted, but no sound came. Patrick stepped forward, his voice sharp. That's nonsense. Christine was with Linda all morning. Poirot raised a hand. Calmez-vous, Monsieur Redfern. Your swim at Ladder Bay, it leaves you unaccounted for. A strong swimmer could reach Gull Cove, assist in moving a body, return unseen. And the cigarette case, with your initials it, was placed to point to you, or to distract us. Patrick's face flushed, but Poirot turned to the room, his voice rising. The crime, it was a duet, a performance by two who knew each other. Well, one to kill, one to deceive. Madame Stuart was strangled earlier, in her room, and carried to the cove. The sunbather at 11:30 was a fiction, to make us believe she lived longer. Inspector Colgate, his eyes wide, leaned forward. You're saying it was planned, Monsieur Poirot? By whom? Poirot's smile was almost serene. The motive, it is love twisted by betrayal, and greed disguised as loyalty. The players, they are before us. But let us test the truth. Tomorrow, we return to Gull Cove to reenact the scene. The tide, the path, the timing they will speak. The guests dispersed, their faces a mosaic of fear, doubt, and defiance. Kenneth stared at the floor. Linda clung to her sketchbook. Patrick and Christine exchanged a glance. Rosamond's pencil stilled. Major Barry drained his glass. And the gardeners whispered furiously. Emily Brewster rose, her eyes blazing, but said nothing. Poirot watched them go, his mind alight with certainty. The reconstruction, he murmured to Colgate. It will force the truth to surface. The little gray cells, they do not err. As the moon rose over the sea, Poirot felt the puzzle's edges aligning, the truth a breath away from revelation. Chapter 11. The Confession. The morning sun rose over Smuggler's Island, its light sharp and unyielding, as if determined to pierce the shadows of deceit that clung to the Jolly Roger Hotel. Hercule Poirot stood in the center of the hotel lounge, his small frame radiating an authority that silenced the restless murmurs of the gathered guests. Inspector Colgate flanked him, his notebook closed, his eyes fixed on Poirot, with a mixture of respect and anticipation. The air was taut, the guests' faces Kenneth Marshall, Linda, Patrick, and Christine Redfern, Rosamond Darnley, Major Barry, the gardeners, and Emily Brewster, etched with unease. Poirot's reconstruction of Arlena Stuart's murder had set the stage, and now he would draw the curtain on the truth. Madame et Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady, his eyes gleaming like polished jet. The murder of Madame Arlena Stuart was no act of passion, but a performance, planned with the precision of a clockmaker. Hercule Poirot has seen through the illusion, and now, the truth, it will be revealed. He paced slowly, his cane a metronome, each tap punctuating his words. The key, it is the timeline. Madame Stuart was dead by 11, yet Mademoiselle Brewster saw her alive at 11:30. This, it is impossibly less another played her part. Emily Brewster bristled, her black dress rustling. I saw her, Monsieur Poirot, waving, clear as day. Poirot raised a hand, his smile gentle but unyielding. Oui, mademoiselle, you saw a woman in a green swimsuit, a hat obscuring her face, posing as Madame Stuart, but it was not her. It was Madame Christine Redfern. A gasp rippled through the room, and Christine's face drained of color, her hands clutching her skirt. Patrick stepped forward, his voice sharp. That's absurd. Christine was with Linda, sketching. Poirot's gaze turned to Christine, his eyes piercing. Madame, you left Mademoiselle Linda briefly, to fetch a shawl, oui. And at 11:15, you took a bath. Why? To wash away the sand of Gull Cove, where you played the role of the living Arlena. Christine's lips trembled, but she shook her head. I was sketching. I needed to cool off. You're mistaken. Poirot's mustache twitched. The little gray cells. They do not mistake. Your sketch. It is smudged, hasty, and the bath it was to erase the traces of your deception. He turned to the room, his voice rising. Let us unravel the crime. Madame Stuart was strangled in her room, before 11, by Monsieur Patrick Redfern. Patrick's face reddened, his fists clenching. That's a lie, he shouted, but Poirot continued, undeterred. You, monsieur, were infatuated with Madame Stuart, but she was a danger to your marriage, your future. With Madame Redfern, your true partner, you planned her death. You strangled her with her own scarf, then carried her body to Gull Cove before the tide rose, placing it on the towel to suggest a later death. Poirot's eyes locked on Christine. You, madame, played the sunbather at 11:30, wearing Madame Stuart's swimsuit and hat, waving to Mademoiselle Brewster from a distance. This convinced all that Madame Stuart lived longer, giving you both an alibi. You returned to your room, took a bath to wash away the sand, and rejoined Mademoiselle Linda, your absence unnoticed. Christine's composure cracked, her eyes filling with tears. No, she whispered, but her voice was weak, a thread snapping under strain. Poirot turned to Patrick. Your swim at Ladder Bay, it was a cover. You swam to Gull Cove, helped place the body, then returned. The cigarette case, with your initials, was a misstep left to confuse, but it pointed to your presence. Patrick's face twisted, his charm gone. You've no proof, he snarled. Poirot's smile was serene. The proof, it is in the details. The towel, unrumpled. The suntan oil, unused. The sand, undisturbed. And the scarf, in Madame Stuart's room, which the police will find bears traces of her skin. Christine sobbed, her hands covering her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she cried. Patrick said we'd be free together, without her. She was ruining everything. Patrick lunged toward her, but Colgate's constable restrained him. Quiet, Christine, he hissed, but her confession poured out. He killed her in her room, early. I only helped. I wore her swimsuit, lay on the towel, waved to Emily. We thought it was perfect. Her voice broke, and she collapsed into a chair, weeping. Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. You sought freedom, madame, but you chose murder. Monsieur Redfern, he used your love, and you, his accomplice, ensured the deception. He turned to Kenneth Marshall, whose face was a mask of grief and relief. Monsieur Marshall, you suspected their affair. Your alibi, it was weak, to protect your dignity, not your guilt. Kenneth nodded, his voice low. I knew she was unfaithful, but I didn't kill her. The room was silent, the guests stunned. Rosamond Darnley's eyes met Kenneth's, a silent promise of solace. Linda clutched her sketchbook, her anger softened by truth. Major Barry stared into his glass, the gardeners whispered no more, and Emily Brewster's righteous indignation faded into shock. Colgate stepped forward, his voice steady. Patrick Redfern, Christine Redfern, you're under arrest for the murder of Arlena Stuart. The constables moved, handcuffs gleaming in the morning light. Poirot stepped back, his work done. The little gray cells, he said softly to Colgate. They see what the heart conceals. Love, greed, betrayal, they weave a deadly net. As the Redferns were led away, the hotel seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare. The truth, as always, had been in the details, and Hercule Poirot had found it. Chapter 12. The departure of the sun rose over Smuggler's Island with a gentle warmth, its light softening the jagged cliffs and bathing the Jolly Roger Hotel in a serene glow. The turmoil of Arlena Stuart's murder had subsided, leaving a quiet that was both mournful and cathartic. Hercule Poirot stood on the hotel's terrace, his straw hat tilted against the morning breeze, his eyes tracing the horizon where sea met sky. The case was solved. The culprits, Patrick and Christine Redfern, now in custody. Their meticulously planned deception unraveled by Poirot's relentless logic. Yet, as always, the aftermath of truth left ripples among those who remained. The terrace was nearly empty, the guests subdued as they prepared to leave the island. Kenneth Marshall stood by the railing, his lean frame outlined against the sea, his gray eyes distant, but no longer guarded. Poirot approached, his cane tapping. "Softly, Monsieur Marshall," he said, his voice warm. "You carry a heavy burden, but it is lighter now. Kenneth turned, a faint smile touching his lips. "You've given me clarity, Monsieur Poirot. Arlena, she was a storm I couldn't weather. But now, I can move forward." His gaze drifted to the cliff path, where Rosamond Darnley walked, her steps slow and deliberate. Poirot noted the look, a spark of hope amidst the grief. "Bon courage," he murmured, bowing slightly. Linda Marshall sat on a bench, her sketchbook open to a new page, her pencil sketching the outline of the cove, not with anger, but with a tentative peace. Poirot paused beside her. "Mademoiselle Linda," he said, "you draw the future now, not the past. Nest CEPA." Linda looked up, her dark eyes softer than before. "I hated her," she admitted, her voice low, "but I'm glad it's over. Father, he's himself again." She glanced at Kenneth, a flicker of reconciliation in her expression. Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching. "The heart, it heals with time. You are strong, petite." Linda's lips curved, a small but genuine smile, and Poirot moved on, satisfied. Rosamond Darnley, returning from her walk, met Poirot near the hotel entrance. Her hazel eyes were calm, but a quiet intensity lingered, as if she had made a decision. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, "you've done more than solve a crime. You've given us a chance to start again." She glanced at Kenneth, a subtle warmth in her gaze. Poirot tilted his head, his smile knowing. "The past, mademoiselle, it binds us, but the future, it is yours to shape." Rosamond's smile was brief, but genuine, a promise of possibilities. Unspoken Bajer Barry, his bluster diminished, was packing his bags in the lounge, his whiskey glass untouched. The gardeners, their gossip silenced, were arranging their departure with the manager, their voices subdued. Emily Brewster, her black system, black dress absorbing the light, stood alone, her righteous indignation replaced by a quiet introspection. Poirot did not approach her. Her role as an unwitting witness to the deception required no further confrontation. The truth had been her absolution, though her silence suggested a lingering discomfort with her mistaken sighting. As the police boat prepared to depart with Patrick and Christine in custody, Poirot gathered his own belongings, his suitcase packed with the precision of a man who valued order. The hotel manager, his nervous demeanor softened by relief, approached him at the jetty. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "we owe you a great debt. This place, it's peaceful again, thanks to you." Poirot tipped his hat, his eyes twinkling. "The sun, it shines on beauty and evil alike, monsieur. But the little gray cells, they always find the truth." He boarded the boat, the sea stretching before him like a canvas of secrets now laid bare. As the boat pulled away from Smuggler's Island, Poirot gazed back at the Jolly Roger, its white walls gleaming in the sunlight. The island had been a stage, its players bound by love, betrayal, and greed. The drama was over, the truth revealed, and Hercule Poirot, ever the guardian of order, sailed toward the mainland, ready for the next puzzle that awaited his little gray cells.